Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Over the Cap podcast. It is June 4th, 2023, and this is Jason Fitzgerald. You can find me on Twitter at Jason_OTC, or you can email me, Jason at overthecap.com. Getting in a Sunday morning podcast this week. We had a graduation party to go to last night, 8th grade graduation for the kids. So, they were all excited about that. So by the time we got home, just was like, I don't really feel like recording. So I figured I would kind of get this in because the week before I didn't do one because I was just too busy doing mainly yard work stuff and just some other things, I guess, that we had going on with the kids. It's the end of the school year, so a lot of stuff goes on, I guess, with that. And, so we'll see how the summer goes, but a bit busy couple weeks coming up here. But we'll get around to doing the podcast at least every other week. So Jacob had a party to go to that I didn't go to today, so I figured I would just try to sneak this one in now. No Nelly this week. Decided to record upstairs instead of downstairs. So Nelly's doing good. Nelly will be back next week, but last I checked, she was being lazy hanging out in her little house downstairs. So not too much going on in the world of the NFL right now. This is kind of the dead season with it, but a couple things here and there going on. But I guess what I'll talk about this week, and it was what I was going to start with last week as well, and that's the Jimmy Garoppolo and a discussion about injury waivers and NFL contracts. Last week it was just a thing on, Pro Football Talk put out an article where they're making a big deal. I thought it was just making way too much of a deal out of the fact that Jimmy Garoppolo has a injury waiver in his contract. And, Florio put out an article about it. I immediately was like, well, this isn't new. Like, he talked about the contract being revised and, the language in the injury waiver. And it's like, I talked about this on here, 2 months ago. We've had the numbers online, since March. So it's not like this was anything new that, certainly not any listener or anyone who goes to the website, would have seen, that they were unaware of. It's been there for some time that the Raiders did that contract differently after they went through the physical with him. So, Florio gets all pissy when you, say, it's not exactly new news and you disagree with the assessment that you're making that big of a deal of it, because he did. He went down the conspiracy theories of, the Raiders signed him knowing he's never going to play football for them and they don't want to pay him, but they want to sell jerseys. And, this is a good way to lure Tom Brady out of his little ownership portion of the team and get him back out on the field and all this different stuff, that's there. But probably not a bad time to discuss injury waivers and just kind of using him as an example. So an injury waiver in a contract is not really uncommon. It is less common for a star football player, but it's not uncommon. So, an injury waiver is basically you go for a physical, and when you get your comprehensive evaluation from the team, that team, their doctor is basically concerned about something, and they're going to go to you with that concern. And if the team has more leverage, they're probably going to get you to sign an injury waiver. Injury waiver protects the team in the event that whatever that injury is that they discovered makes you unable to play football. That's the bottom line. If you re-injure it. So if you have a knee condition and you re-injure your knee in training camp, they can cut you without having to worry about anything. Other than the signing bonus that's in a contract, which the Raiders did remove from Garoppolo's deal, but they didn't remove it. They moved where it goes to. The way that certain things were written, it made it sound like he took a pay cut to stay with Vegas. He didn't, but he did move where that money is. So if that condition prevents him from playing football, it still gives the Raiders an opportunity to recover what would have been his signing bonus when he did the deal. But there's a lot of players who don't get signing bonuses in contracts. If it wasn't that the terms were kind of leaked out that, he originally was going to get a signing bonus, nobody would really even know that that kind of change was in the contract. But that was related to the injury. We again mentioned that here, that they removed the signing bonus due to that concern. But basically what you're doing is you have a protection of injury to any other part of your body. So in Garoppolo's case, it's his foot. If he injures an arm, he's still protected just like anybody else. But signing the injury waivers basically comes down to leverage. Who has more leverage? Is it the team or is it the player? In this case, I would say it was the team. Not just because he signed the waiver, but just because, Garoppolo is not a great quarterback by any stretch of the imagination. I can't imagine that there was a market for him outside of Vegas. And I would imagine that's probably one of the reasons why he agreed to this. It's like you weigh your options when you take on that waiver. You're taking on that waiver because you believe that you can play football. So you don't think it's really going to impact you. So, you're kind of taking that side of it because that the other deals that are out there are probably not that good because, who would be the other team to even sign him to a deal? Maybe the Jets if the Rodgers thing fell through. So you end up signing the waiver to do your contract with that team. And, that's what happened. It's kind of, in many ways, so this is the team protecting itself from catastrophe, right? The ankle doesn't heal properly, gets infected. He never can play football again because of that. You're protecting yourself. It's no different than when a player takes an injury guarantee in a contract. They're protecting themselves. They're not hurt. They don't think they're going to get hurt. You're protecting yourself in the event you do get hurt. So it's just kind of the opposite of that in terms of risk and reward. But when players sign these injury waivers and the team signs them, the team believes the guy can play football. If they didn't believe he could play football, you wouldn't sign him. You're not signing him to sell jerseys. You're not signing him for the sake of signing him. If you don't think he can play football, you walk away. That's typically what happens. Right? Years ago, the Raiders signed Roger Saffold to a contract that, seemed very, very bullish for him. And out of nowhere, because he didn't have an injury history that I can recall, he failed his physical. And I figured it was just a way for them to get out of the contract because everyone seemed surprised by this. And what happened, the Rams signed him to a pretty lucrative deal, not the same deal. A couple days later, they had no concerns about this injury. And that's another thing. Doctors have different opinions and teams have different risk tolerances. When it came to Saffold, the Raiders at that point in time had a concern. The Rams, doing the same type of evaluation, did not. It's very possible another team would have looked at Garoppolo's foot and just given the check mark. I just don't think a team existed in that case. But we've seen this before, right? Michael Brockers signs with the Ravens. They say no. He goes to the Rams. There's no injury waiver. Now, the contract was not as lucrative as his first deal. The guarantee was not as good. But that's common, right? When you sign with a team in free agency, that's often the best deal that's out there. When you flunk the physical, time has passed. Other teams maybe you were talking to are now gone. There is a red flag now because one team did fail you. But, a lot of these players get signed. The Bears failed someone last year, defensive tackle, right? He signed another contract. Perfectly fine. No issues. Saffold, when I talked about him, he's only had 1 year in his career, and he's had a very long career. Where the injury, and it probably wasn't even the same injury, but where he was injured. He's been one of the most durable players. Now his career's winding down, but one of the most durable players. There was Ryan Grant, who signed with the Ravens. They failed him on his physical. He took a 1-year deal with Indianapolis. Now, he never kind of recovered from that, but it had nothing to do with the injury. He didn't sign an injury waiver there. They were fine. It was just that their risk was we're only going to take 1 year on it. And I think that's kind of a fair assessment. If you're a team, when you sign these deals, whether it's injury, whether it's guarantees, whatever, you're basically looking for a player that is going to give you production for the length of the guarantee plus 1 season. That's what you need to make the contract successful. So, an injury waiver is a way to protect yourself from a absolute catastrophe when you've been diagnosed with a pre-existing condition. And again, it varies from team to team as to how that'll be. And the one thing is that it is uncommon with star players, typically because those star players have leverage. So when a star player has leverage, the team is not going to ask for that kind of stuff. How often do you hear about, player signs a big extension or a big contract, kind of sucks his first year, doesn't play up to the deal, and stories will come out, he had a nagging injury when he signed. But he wanted to play through it because he wanted to prove that he was playing on that contract rather than getting surgery to get it taken care of. And now the season's over. Now he's going to get surgery and watch out. He's going to be back next year. It's like that. That was pre-existing, odds are. Did they just flunk him on it? I mean, did they just not see it? Did they not care about it? So those kind of things happen. But in this case, I think it was just a situation where he knew there was no other contract anywhere close to this that was going to exist in the market. So he's willing to take it. But again, you're expecting him to play. If you don't expect him to play, you just don't sign it. Just like all those other guys did. They did not expect those guys to play. And in the Raiders, for their case, all they cared about was this year. Peyton Manning signed an injury waiver, right? He had that neck injury in Indianapolis. When he signs with Denver, it's kind of sight unseen. Denver was willing to guarantee that first year's contract no matter what. And let's be real. There's a giant gap between what Peyton Manning was and what Jimmy Garoppolo ever has been. So the way Peyton Manning's worked was his salary was covered for his first year. His salary was sort of covered in the second year. And in the third year, his salary was not protected if he had another injury it was specific vertebrae, I think, in the neck. That if there was an injury for that. So basically, if he re-injured that, he would not collect his third year salary, even though it was injury protected. If something else occurred, that caused him to be unable to play football, he still would have collected. There was a way for them, basically, if he was healthy enough, but just couldn't throw the ball well anymore, they could have still gotten out of that second year's salary. There were still ways to do that. But I don't believe it was specific on the injury at that point. If he was injured, I think they were still going to let that slide. But again, it was an injury protection, and similar to this one, it would go away after 1 year. Everybody gets wrapped up in the language that's in these things because, look, these things are written from a legal perspective to basically give you blanket coverage. And they sound ominous, they sound crazy, whatever. It's basically blanket language for anybody who signs these deals. So in Garoppolo's case, and this is what people are making a big deal of, player has been informed that he's at increased risk of further injury. Symptoms require surgery, permanent disability, loss of motion, other problems related to the injury, not including but not limited to further injury, instability, swelling, pain, injury to surrounding muscles and soft tissue, surgical management, arthritis, the need for treatments, disability. Understand such conditions has decreased his ability to play professional football. And continuing to play professional football may release in deterioration, aggravation, re-injury of the existing conditions, rendering him physically unable to perform the services that would be required of an NFL player by an NFL contract. player understands the consequences of, playing football, but he's willing to accept this waiver so he has a chance to do it. And then you get to this, because he desires to play football, player, all his agents, representatives, heirs, anyone and everybody that could be affiliated with the player discharges any kind of responsibilities, liabilities, the club, the owners, physicians, trainers, the NFL, anybody, if he has an aggravation of that injury. So, so it sounds ominous. It's just what's in everybody's waiver. That part is pretty standard. That part is pretty common. So, it doesn't give them the ability to, just decide, oh yeah, this guy can't play, or, we expect him to not play, but we signed him anyway, just to see what would happen. I mean, what would be worse for a team walking away from this deal in March because you didn't think he could play, or carrying him through the summer only to find out he can't play it, where now you've ruined your draft, you've ruined your offseason, because instead of getting rid of him and going down the, not a great rabbit hole, but going down the rabbit hole of, Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, Jameis Winston, or something like that, those kind of players, you've got nobody. You maybe have a chance to draft someone, but you're like, no, we got Garoppolo. And then your plan all along was that you were never going to play him, or you knew he was damaged goods and he probably wasn't going to play for you. I mean, come on, that's like not the way you do that at all. That doesn't make any sense. That gets everybody fired. That gets every fan of the team just absolutely angry. You're better off just not signing him in the first place. Now, will this injury prove to be something? It very well could. Just like any injury in the NFL. Just like any injury in whatever. You don't know what's going to happen, when you get cut open and they put things back together, and you don't know how things will possibly heal. And, Jimmy Garoppolo is one of the most injury-prone players in the NFL. So odds are he was going to miss a bunch of games anyway, just because he always does, it seems like. He has trouble. You probably can't count on him 17. But really, it's just all about risk management, risk tolerance, and protecting yourselves. And what would have been worse for the Raiders? That he was hurt and never doesn't play it down for him, and they don't even get any kind of financial compensation for it? Teams take insurance policies out. Why? Well, they're protecting themselves against the unknown, for players. So, to read into one player's contract and to think that, like, this is the most unique situation in the world, it's not. Kyler Murray and his homework clause, yeah, that was a unique situation. That was something that was probably pretty telling about what they thought of their quarterback that they just signed to this massive contract. Injury waiver? Is what it is. You'd be having the same reaction if he was just having a slow recovery from surgery. This just makes it sound worse because you're like, oh, well, they knew about it. It's like you should be happy that they knew about it and they put that they were able to get him to agree to a waiver. But, just not the biggest deal in the world. So wait to see how it goes. But injury waivers are not some random, super uncommon thing. Not having a signing bonus in a contract is not a super uncommon thing. Having guarantees that can void for certain reasons, not a super uncommon thing. So, you take it for what it is. I think it's, at the moment, still making a mountain out of a molehill. But, we'll see how the recovery goes for him in the coming months, and you see if he's able to play in training camp. and if the season begins, and if he does play this year, if he makes the team in week 1 or whatever, I believe he's still covered by termination pay, as even if he got released. So his salary should be protected for 2023 once he makes the regular season, or if he makes the regular season, and as long as that foot is not injured again, his salary is also protected for 2024 to the same extent that it was prior to this. A couple of people asked me why I was still showing dead money in his contract as guaranteed, and that's because his body is completely guaranteed just like it was before, with the exception of his one foot and probably a very specific part of the foot, some related to the ankle, or something along those lines. So, it's protected for just about anything. And if they just wanted to release him because, they didn't like the way he was playing and they were trying to claim that the foot was still injured, you'd end up with a grievance regarding that kind of termination. So you wait to see how it goes. Bills signed a big contract extension, Ed Oliver, yesterday. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what they were seeing. $17 million a year. Maybe this is going to be one of those deals where that $17 million is reached because that last year the contract is $30 million. I know the defensive tackle market has jumped up. It seemed like this was probably pegging him to like the Jones, Zach Allen kind of deals that came out this year, and just kind of giving a premium because he's a first round pick. I don't know. I thought that was just kind of a little bit of a mistake of a deal, but we're going to wait to see what those numbers actually are when they do come out. I haven't seen them yet, to see what's the realistic portion of it. This reads a little bit more to me like a team needing salary cap space and deciding this is the way to do it versus anything else. The defensive tackle market is a little hard to project sometimes. A player like him, the way he's been, I would say his first 4 years, more or less they're going to fall in that category of, the guys who do make $13 million-ish a year. So maybe with the market increasing, maybe eventually that jumps up to that 17 number that was reported. But those kind of players too. Some years you'll see those players get $13 million a year. Other years you'll see them completely fall by the wayside, and they'll have to sign a 1-year prove-it deal for $8 million. They might sign a 1-year prove-it deal for $5 million. There's some randomness that comes in with that, simply because there's a lot of decent defensive tackles who are typically available, unless the guys are legitimate pass rushers. The guys who are legit pass rushers, they're never really available in free agency, but a lot of the other players are. So there's a lot of competition for jobs. So I don't know. I'm pretty surprised at Buffalo doing that. They've made some moves, in the last 2 years. I mentioned this on Twitter yesterday. It's ring chasing. When they did that Von Miller deal, it's just like, what are you doing? Like, where is that coming from? And then it's just, you see like a bunch of little things. Even guys that they brought back this year. And I know they're bringing them back for probably just a year. And it's not like they're big expensive deals, but it's like that's not the way to extend a window. Your window in the NFL is very short. And there's so much roster turnover that when you have these playoff runs where, and I don't want to say the seasons are unsuccessful. Last year, maybe you could read it that way. They struggled a bit down the stretch, and, obviously they had that awful loss in the playoffs. Year before was more of a disappointing finish where you just had that crazy game between them and the Chiefs. But, it's like your window usually is 2 years with a group of players. And for Buffalo, those 2 years were probably 2020 and 2021. And trying to add like a Von Miller, trading for the running back in the middle of the season, which is fine. They were hoping for something there. Extending certain players or redoing the deals to give them a little bit of a raise to maybe make them happy. Your team was probably not going to be as good in 2022 as they were in 2021. And I don't think they were as good. And I know people will point to the Von Miller injury as, just kind of a real big negative that was there. But, that's something you should have probably projected would happen, given Miller's age and history. Miller is the kind of player, much like what you saw happen with the Rams, that's the kind of player you bring in mid-season. That's when things are going good and you're like, all right, let's see who we can bring in from another team and, add him to a team that we know is a contender. We've only got to deal with the salary for 8 weeks or something like that. Get him acclimated to the system, get him acclimated to our players, and, just have him ready and raring to go, hopefully for the playoffs. Versus making a giant, 3-year commitment or whatever it is to just an older football player. The Bills, no team has probably worked free agency better than Buffalo. They are not a team that has typically been made up of a bunch of homegrown players. Obviously their biggest star is, but they're not a team that's really been built that way. They're a team that's been built a lot from the outside. Really, I'm not going to say perfect free agent signings, but very good free agent signings. Overall, a lot of guys that weren't misses, trades that have worked out incredibly well. But they're buying into something that probably, even though they're saying, well, don't expect us to make the splashes we made the year before, and that was true. They didn't, because they don't want to go down the total devastating salary cap road that, we've seen the Falcons and the Bears and some other teams go down, but they're not optimizing what they're going to be able to do in the future. It's like, yeah, we're not making a big signing here and there, but we're making a bunch of kind of mid-level signings. They're not going to be too negative impacting, but if you take all of those together, that is like adding a big player or two. I've said for a long time, I thought that was the best front office in football. And I still think they're a very good front office. But if they have a year where Josh Allen gets hurt, and I ain't going to say this about any team that's got a quarterback, or that doesn't get their quarterback going. If they have a year where he gets hurt, Buffalo, I think, has potential to go into a complete tailspin. I think that's actually how they've kind of set up this roster at this point now, is to where if they do get one of these years where Allen just, gets walloped early in the season, I don't think that's something they recover from. I think Kansas City could deal with Patrick Mahomes being gone for, a portion of the year and at least be respectable. Obviously everything runs through him, much like in Buffalo, everything runs through Allen. But I think the Buffalo roster at this point would just kind of fall apart. I think there's, you have a couple of these players who are a little bit older, and I think there'd be a lot of concern about them going through the whole season. And if you don't have Allen to cover for that, I'd be a little bit worried as to, where that would go. So I don't know. I think that Buffalo has, I lost their way is the phrase that I use. Like these are things that I think when you pull yourself out of the situation, if they would kind of pull themselves out of it, and you take an overview and you go, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't do things that way. But then when you get this close and you keep getting that close and you just don't get over the hump, it hurts you. And, if you're looking at things like an arms race, and, I don't know if that's the right way to phrase it, but, you look at the Bengals. Now, the Bengals have to sign a lot of players, but they're ninth in cap room in 2024. The Chiefs, they're 13th in cap room in 2024. They don't have as much to sign. They have a couple guys to do. Jones being the main one, I think that would come up. You look at the Bills, 25th in projected cap room, in 2024. So, they have a lot that's invested in this. The Bills in 2025, 28th in the league. And I know that's going pretty far out because you got a lot of places that you can go there, to make changes. But, you just look and it starts to follow a pattern that you would expect to see from someone like the Saints. The couple years from now, the Bills 30th in cap room. So it's not like there's any give up at all. It's just at some point you're probably going to take a hit in dead money for players you're going to have to release. But your roster is more or less set up as a, what you see is what you get. Your only additions are going to come, in the draft. And if you try to add anywhere else, you're just going to be pushing more and more money, into the future in the cap to bring in typically lesser and lesser players, is what's going to happen. So I'm not crazy about, what the Bills have done here, but there's other teams that have, gotten by with doing similar stuff, and, things can change, and their quarterback's terrific. So wait to see. But yeah, I was not a big fan of this move, but let's wait, I guess, until the full contract details come in before, criticizing that one a little too much. One other thing, this was an interesting discussion this week. So you guys know that there's not a lot of time that I get to listen to different podcasts, but usually I try to catch a lot of times Sumer Sports one, Kevin Cole's Unexpected Points. I like both of those a lot. Don't get a ton of time, so I don't get to listen to all of them. But, I always find them pretty interesting. But on the Sumer one this week, they did a kind of a quarterback draft where you were kind of taking contracts into account. And I missed the criteria at the beginning of it. I didn't want to go back. I was listening to a lot of it live. And, I didn't want to go. I didn't get a chance to go back and see exactly what the criteria was. But I did think that was kind of an interesting exercise, and, just wanted to look at some of those numbers now, as for, why you might rank certain players in certain spots. So the number one pick overall that they had there was Mahomes, and number two was Josh Allen. And that makes sense to me because the first thing, obviously, you're looking for, you need a quarterback. You need a guy who's a proven talent. And unlike other positions in the NFL, quarterbacks last a pretty long time. So when you've got guys in their, 20s or early 30s, you still are probably going to get, depending on the style that they play, a pretty good amount of years past that. There's probably more concern with Allen than there would be Mahomes, simply because of, the way that Allen is used with the running stuff that's there and some of the hits that maybe he's going to take for that. But, these two, far and away, these are the best contracts in the NFL. So if you look, if you just look at this from this standpoint, Mahomes has 9 years remaining under contract, average salary cap hit of $48.23 million. On a long-term deal, meaning anything more than 2 years, that would be fifth in the NFL. So that's your top quarterback in the league is fifth from a salary cap perspective. And when you factor in, what some of these guys are going to get, like a Joe Burrow, let's say Joe Burrow signs $55 million for 5 years. plus his existing numbers, you're going to get 7 years. You're going to get an effective cap on that of about $43 million. That's assuming that he signs, now. So you're talking about Mahomes 9 years at 48 versus Burrow would probably be 7 years at about 43. I think that's a no-brainer. You take Mahomes over that. Josh Allen is a 6-year contract, 6 years remaining, average cap hit $43.6 million on the remaining portion of his deal. So again, I think when you look at, the talent of those two players and you look at those existing salaries, that to me just makes sense because you're going to have, unless you think Burrow and Herbert are better than both of those guys, and I don't think anybody would even remotely claim that they're better than Mahomes. I don't think anyone would really even say that about Allen. They're probably both going to be right about the same cost as those guys once they sign their extensions, which are coming this year or next year or whatever it's going to be. Their effective cost is going to be identical. So I think it absolutely makes sense to have Mahomes number 1, Josh Allen number 2. And I almost look at those guys as kind of their own tier. With, I think, a pretty big gap between Mahomes and Allen. But, I would look at those two as kind of their own tier. I think the next two that you would look at would be Burrow and Herbert. And I think, where I mentioned they're going to be in that 43 to 40, if they get a deal this year, 43 to $42 million effective over 7 years. That's a pretty good contract to have, there as well. So I think that is probably where I would go with my top 4. I think even though those guys are getting extensions, I think that's all a good place to be. Now, the money that those guys are going to get is probably going to be very similar to the effective value of someone like a Jalen Hurts, who's also at 43. Kyler Murray's at 43. I think those two guys are better than both of those two. So I think that's one that I would look at there. So I think I would go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then from that point forward, I think then I'm just dropping down and I'm looking at guys who are, on rookie contracts, where you're looking at Trevor Lawrence. He's been the one guy who has been kind of, he stood out at least a little bit from his group, and you've still got a little bit of time, before he gets that deal. So, you can factor his money in and, seeing where he would be, his moving forward from here, you'd probably be looking at 8 effective years or 9 effective years versus Burrow, which is, that's going to be 7 effective. So here you'd probably be looking at a 9, and you're getting that real cheap year in here. So I think that would be that'd be the guy that you'd probably look at as number 5. And I think then you probably are just kind of throwing darts as to what you thought about the first round players from this year. And I think that would probably be your next group of players, unless you wanted to go Hurts, which you could do. You could always do that as your next possibility. But I think it would be, what do you think of the guys who just got drafted? I don't have their numbers in front of me here, only because none of them, I don't think any of them have officially signed their deals. So I didn't include them in there. But, I think that's how I would look at it. There's a couple of interesting players when you get here, and this is what happens sometimes when you kind of make a mess of some of the deals and you take out the voids and all that kind of stuff. And, one of the players that got mentioned was Dak Prescott. And, you can make an argument he's the best quarterback in the NFC. Now, this is one that I believe made their list. I don't even think I would put him on a list of players that I would pick up. And the reason is just because the way his contract is structured, it's kind of a mess. You're looking at a player who has an average remaining cap hit for 2 active years. That's all you get on his current contract. So, if you want to look at him as a player who was going back to when he signed at $40 million a year, yeah, you would include that contract the same way that you would be looking at a Jalen Hurts kind of deal and saying, yeah, that's viable as a player that you would take in a redraft. Dak Prescott's salary cap obligations for 2 years average $61 million a year. Now, Dallas has void years in there, so they'd be able to spread that out over 3 years versus 2. But still, the effective amount of cap room that you're spending on him is $62 million. And obviously, he wants an extension, and you already made him the highest paid player in the NFL. You're going to make him the highest paid player again. Let's just say for whatever, let's say it's $57 million a year. You know, if he signs after all these other guys play, and it's another 4-year deal. So you add that 228 to, you know, all these existing salary cap charges, you know, that he's got at the 122. You know, you'd have 6 years invested in him at an average cost of $58.5 million a year. Like, you can't take that player at all. You just can't. You know, Mahomes is 48, Josh Allen 43, Jalen Hurts 43, Kyler Murray 43, Stafford 42, Daniel Jones 40.7, Derek Carr 37.5. You know, Burrow, Herbert, we talked about those guys. Their effective cap values are going to be like 43, 44. Same thing, you know, with the Lawrence group and all those other guys. As long as you do those extensions during that period of time, you know, those are viable players to have. You know, you look at Prescott, you know, at 58.5. I mean, that's just not. Deshaun Watson, average cap hit $55 million a year. You know, now that, again, there's void years to get an extra year there, but it still doesn't matter. It still means that you're accounting for $55 million for 4 years of play. It's just, it's too much, you know, relative to the rest of these players. You know, Aaron Rodgers, $55 million for 2 years. Like that's insane. Lamar Jackson is 52 for 5. So at least, you know, that and Watson at least are lock-ins, you know, because of the period of time. Kirk Cousins, you know, they have $49 million that they have to account for on the cap for Kirk Cousins. Now, they're pushing most of it into next year when he's going to leave the team probably. But let's say he gets an extension for Russell Wilson money or something like that, you know, 48, 49 million a year. I don't know if he really would, but I mean, you're not going to win with those kind of numbers. Yeah, they're just way too high. Wilson's at 46. Tannehill just has the 1 year left at 46. You know, Jared Goff at 32. You know, that's at least reasonable. You know, Geno Smith's at 25. Garoppolo, 24. You know, so it's really those two players, the two guys who are going to sign the extensions. And I think it's a pretty big gap between the next group, which would be the Hurts, Kyler Murray. You know, I think that's a pretty big gap. And I think I'd put Lawrence in that gap too, because I don't think we've seen enough, you know, to kind of count him in there. But I thought this was interesting, but, you know, their discussion was interesting on it. But I think, you know, when you just look at these numbers, it just shows you the different benefits of extending a player early versus, you know, kind of holding off a little bit like was done with Prescott, or when you trade for a guy like a Deshaun Watson, you know, and you redo the deal. And just what happens when you just kind of fiddle with these contracts too much. Like the Prescott stuff, you know, that's eye-opening. You know, when you have those kind of numbers, basically you're putting all your ability to really be successful in the front end of a contract for a player like that. You know, you're really doing that. You're not leaving yourself a lot of leeway on the back end, and you're really putting yourself in a position to where you need to extend the player. And, you know, in Prescott's case, you know, he's been banged up. You know, he feels like, you know, he's still pretty young, but he feels like he's on the older side of that spectrum. Like when you look at the quarterbacks and you say, yeah, you know, they should be able to get a lot of effective time out of them until they're like 34, 35 is the year where you say that's where the breakdown is going to occur. You almost feel like Prescott's not going to get there. Let me look up Dak's numbers and stuff. Maybe similar to like a Wilson situation. So he'll be 30 this year. And, he only played 5 games in 2020, played 16 in 21, played 12 last year. You just wonder, is this going to be like a lot of kind of come down, from that, numbers wise. Last year his numbers were, pretty far down, 240 yards a game passing. Granted the offense ran differently, but, they might have a new system in there this year, but, that's the kind of player, where you look at it, you're really you're gonna screw yourself over on that contract probably. And this is exactly what happened with them with Tony Romo. Exactly what happened with him. You voided out his deal to the extent, from a salary cap perspective, it was a mess. You basically give the player a blank check to write their own next contract. And in Romo's case, he was at the age where that breakdown was going to occur. There were some warning signs already there, with injuries and stuff like that and just being banged up. But he came off that one, pretty terrific season and, gets that big extension, basically never plays. And you kind of feel like they're set up to be Denver with Russell Wilson. At least it won't cost them draft picks, but the effective value is going to be 12 to $15 million a year more for Prescott than what the Broncos are going to pay for Wilson, just simply because of the timing of the deals and the fact that the Broncos picked him up with lower number existing salaries versus Dallas having pushed all those salaries to the back end of the deal. So, I would not put him from a contractual perspective up high at all. If he were doing 10, Mahomes, Allen, I think Hurts would be in there. I think Murray would be in there. Burrow, Herbert, that's 6. Lawrence would be 7. The question would be, would you want Lamar Jackson at 52? Or just blank shots at the rookies? I might go blank shots at the rookies over Jackson at 52. Yeah, Jackson's another player who's hurt a lot. I think the last 2 years, he's like 12 games. Let's see, what was Jackson at? I'm going to say 12 games a year. Yeah, 12 games. I don't blame him for kind of maybe being very cautious with his injury. I think a lot of teams probably looked at that as a negative. That's just kind of my opinion on it. So I don't know. I think it would be those guys that you would take your shots at as your veteran group or your closer to veteran group. And then I think you're just looking at the guys that were drafted. Last year wasn't much of a group, so I think it would be just the players who were drafted this year. And you would do that. Justin Fields might be interesting, but I have a feeling that the effective payments still end up being high, and I think he's below some of these other guys in terms of ceiling probably as a player. To include him there. But I think it would be then you're just the first round picks from this year. Take your pick as to how you want to rank them. And you put those guys in there because they're so cheap that, you're just trying to build around that. And if they end up being incredibly effective, now you've got a great chance to have a run for the next couple of years. And if you play your cards right with the way that you structure the contract, off the rookie deal, you have a very long time with that. But the negative is they may end up being Zach Wilson, which, obviously would not be a great use of resources. But I think that's the risk reward that you have with all those players. But it's worth doing. But yeah, I did check out their show, and you can watch that, and you can see their discussion on it. But I just thought it was interesting to break down the contracts this way, to see the remaining value and how you would kind of compare that to, I think, remaining value that you would anticipate on the field from those players. All right, let's take a look at some questions here. I had a couple by email, which I'll probably end up missing. Let's see if I can find a couple here. Digging through. I'm trying to go back in my email to make sure I don't miss anything too crazy. Let's see. All right, I don't think anything there. Okay, so let me start with this one. Couple of Jets. This is probably an email question, but I'll talk about it anyway. Jordan Whitehead's cap number's been updated. Previously, it would be savings of 7.5. Now it looks like his contract was renegotiated. Best guess, took a $2 million pay cut to guarantee most of his salary this year, and they had the void years to lower it. So yeah, that's exactly what happened with that deal. So I'll try to email this one when I get a chance there. Colin had a question here. I read in crunching numbers that Thursday Night Football revenue is distributed to owners at a higher rate than the other media revenue. Is that still the case? Does the new flex scheduling help owners more than the players? Oh, I'd have to look that up. I'm not sure if they really changed that. I didn't look into the revenue equation. It always seems as if the way the breakdown ends up working anyway, because the TV contracts are so high, it just seems to be the ultimate number is always reached, whatever it is, the 48%. I think it is 48.5. Maybe there's a kicker with the extra game or whatever. It seems as if that kind of takes precedence over everything regarding the deals. But before, yeah, it was structured in a way that was like an NFL Network property. So it was it fell into a different group. But I would think I'll have to try to look that up. I would think that's probably been revised only because, streaming and that kind of stuff is much more viable as a media presence and certainly revenue stream than it was when the original one was signed in 2011. That was more of a, was not as big of a deal, back in that point in time. Let's see, Kevin. Oh, nope, this is something else. And I do have to email him too. I just keep getting caught up with other stuff. All right, let's go to Twitter. And let's see. All right, just a couple questions here. This will be the quickest podcast we've done in quite some time. Black Gold. With the I think this is Quinn and Williams negotiation, how much money do the Jets stand to gain letting this play out until the tag year compared to paying him what he's asking for? Assume $27 million per year asking. I don't know. If the Jets are going to let this play out, the tag next year, what's the cost of the franchise tag? Tag next year would probably be in the ballpark of 21-ish, 22, depending on where the cap winds up. If the Jets are going to let this play out, you're basically assuming that he's going to play this year, and you're looking at this completely as a 2-year window opportunity where you would tag him, you would pay his salary this year, you would pay him the 20-something next year, and then the following year after that, which would be, in theory, Rodgers would be gone at that point in time. You would probably tag a second time, but just for the sole purpose of trying to trade him and seeing what market would exist. If, the Jets' plan is to extend him on like a 5-year deal, 4-year deal, whatever the case may be, they've cost themselves a couple of $1 million by waiting this long. I'm not sure how much more the market is really going to go up. So, the Jets can probably It's probably not going to be as impactful if they wait until, August. The time for the Jets to have gotten this deal done was February, late February, early March, combine time kind of stuff, because it was just too many things came rolling in after that. So that was probably the time for them to get the deal done, and they failed to do it. But from this point forward, I don't think that they're going to get impacted in a way to where that price is going to go even higher for this year. But certainly if they let this year play out and he has another good season, now you're getting into territory where, you definitely cost yourself. But if the plan is just doing a franchise tag, then, you can go through it. But it's going to be, it's a bad look for the Jets. This is the first big contract they get to do. And they're really kind of blowing it. Now I can understand if the Jets don't see him as that kind of player. This is, Williams may very well end up being a one-season wonder. He doesn't play as much as some of these other guys. The consistency has not been there in the past. He's been more of a flash. Last year was the first year where things really started to come together to where you saw consistency. Now, he still wasn't going to be a 80% playtime kind of guy, but that consistency was there with what he was doing. So, it depends. Going into last year, I would have said the Jets are probably going to let him walk after this season, that they probably won't offer him as an extension. But, you couldn't never do that after what he did this past year. So, but this is one of the things that drives you crazy sometimes with them. The Jets sometimes come across as like they say things, and there's no truth to them whatsoever. And I can't say that's the case here or not the case here, but historically that's been one of the things, whether that is Joe Douglas not knowing what the contract side of things are at the moment, or him just saying what he thinks is the right thing to say as a general manager. I think the Jets have a reputation of saying things that aren't necessarily accurate. And so this might at least be a opportunity for them to kind of change that narrative that might exist about them if they do get a deal done. But, we'll have to wait to see. Douglas said it's going to happen, or said that they're, along in talks and whatnot. So you wait to see with that. Baba, should Burrow just play out his contract plus tags to hit free agency in 4 years' time? So if you're looking to maximize your career earnings as a quarterback, and you are looking to do what is in the quote-unquote best interest of your teammates, which is what many guys will claim to do, absolutely 100%. Because once you get to that third tag, you basically can just punch your own ticket for the rest of your career. And, as I mentioned before, quarterbacks can deal with the fact that the first tag means giving up money in the present. And so does the second tag. 2 tags is giving up money if we're talking about a regular tag versus an exclusive, depending on the time. So what those exclusive prices will be. Yeah, they're giving up money to do that, but it typically will level out probably by the third tag, simply because of the size of the raise that's on there. And then you have the ability to just kind of do what you want. And, if you're a young guy that comes into the league, let's say you're 22 years old and you're going through, or 20, let's even say 23, your first tag will be 28, I guess is what that would be. 29 and 30 would be the way that would work out. I really wish some of these guys would push for the no franchise tag in their rookie deals. You should have that kind of leverage, but nobody ever tries to push for it. But, you could be 30 years old. You'll make just about what everybody else would have made anyway, had you signed an extension by that point in time. And now you're going to be able to sign yourself to probably a 3-year deal that is just ridiculous amount of money as a free agent, and then reopen yourself up again at 34 years old to another contract that's just like a ridiculous amount of money as a free agent. So, Yeah, I think that's the right way to play. It blocks the franchise tag from being used on all the other players in your team, so they're going to get to go to free agency and sell themselves. And if you are a wide receiver, that's an incredibly lucrative market. If you're a pass rusher, that's an incredibly lucrative market. So, I in my mind, yeah, that's the way to play these things. But I can also understand why they don't. The money is so big. It's like, well, you may as well just take it, and everybody loves you for taking the contract, and you don't get into the, all the smearing that goes on when you can't get a deal done. Nick, the Vikings seem to currently have more unresolved than any team right now. Can you walk me through what you might expect to happen with Cook and the money it'll take to get Hunter, Jefferson, Hockenson all happy? I don't understand what's gone on with Dalvin Cook. I don't get why Dalvin Cook is still on the Vikings. Let me look him up. Cook's salary this year, he's got a small guarantee that's in there. His salary cap number this year is 14.1. They would have saved about $6 million if it was a pre-June. Post-June, they saved $9 million. They owe him $2 million. Some of that would come as an offset. Nobody is going to take that salary on this year. Like, I don't understand this idea that, like, oh, well, the Vikings are going to trade him. It's like you look at that and you go, well, what are you going to get, for this type of player? He's a player who is capable of the occasional home run play, and the rest of the time is probably going to give you very little. A yard here, 2 yards there, 3 yards there. So that's something there. When you look at salaries, so for 2023, his salary this year is 1, 2, 3, 4, tied for third highest in the NFL at $11 million. Top salary this year goes to the rookie Robinson at 13.8. Christian McCaffrey is next at $12 million salary. Alvin Kamara, Aaron Jones, and Dalvin Cook are all at $11 million. So who is gonna trade for the fifth highest paid contract or third highest paid contract at the position? And when we get down to what are they willing to pay? So for Zadarius Smith, they picked up about $1.2 million. Even if they did the same, even if they just picked up the guaranteed portion on this, the $2 million, which gets it down to $9 million, he would still be 3, 4, 11th. It's like, in my mind, to make it even reasonable to trade for a player like Cook, you need to get his salary down to probably like the $5-6 million level, with whatever kind of opportunities to earn some more money through incentives or something like that. But you would have to bring that salary down huge, and I can't see why he'd be willing to do that. I don't know why Minnesota would eat that kind of money just to grab a random pick. So I don't understand why this has been dragging on for that. Now, at the same point in time, they have cap room. So they do have some space they can operate with. So it's not like this was a super pressing need. They do have flexibility in some other spots, but I don't know about what makes these other players happy. Hunter, 18 million, 20 million, probably something like that is what he's going to look for. Hockenson, probably 15 a year. We're right around that top. I don't know if anyone's going to look at that Waller deal anymore as anything, at the 17 number, but somewhere in that upper level of players. Jefferson's a different beast. That to me is a player that should be asking for like 30. They'll probably offer him 25, 26, just over the legitimate market numbers here. I don't know. They're just, it was not a great situation to come into, but I still feel as if they've done very little to fix that situation in Minnesota. But, you wait to see as to what's going to go on there. But I don't really get the Cook thing. If Jimmy G's contract is voided due to the ankle injury, does this mean his contract doesn't count in the comp picks? No, it would still count. It's still... The contract itself isn't voided. What voids is the guarantee language in the contract. The guarantee, the injury waiver supersedes basically the guarantee that's in there, and it makes that clause null and void. But the contract itself is still an active NFL contract. Assuming $100 million for Quinnen and Rodgers, what will the Jets cap situation look like in 2024? I don't know. That's a wait and see. Right now you've got Rodgers plugged in on the Jets at like $100 million cap hit next year. So, it's like you look at these cap numbers and none of this stuff really is legitimate. Jets $51 million over the cap next year, and that'll be a little bit higher. They have a couple of rookies that they have to sign, but it's just going to depend on how much they shift to Rodgers. So right now the Jets have about $25 million in cap space. My assumption is that Williams' deal will be a neutral on the cap, maybe even create like $2 million in cap room. Jets still have money they can create with CJ Mosley for this year if need be. They're going to lose a couple million still to rookies. Not a ton, but they might lose a couple of players, a couple of million here and there. So I would guess Rodgers' cap hit is probably going to end up $18 million this year, give or take a little bit. Probably something like $50 million next year. So if you take that into account, just as a rough guess, I would imagine the Jets, before you get into the whole cutting of players and all that stuff, will probably be neutral on the cap, probably be right around whatever the cap limit is, assuming they also re-sign Williams to a deal, and then you just start, seeing what you slice and dice. I still think they'll come to some agreement with Mosley to take a ton off his cap this year and, 2024 probably as well, and guarantee both years. You might be walking from Lake and Tomlinson at that point. That saves you $8 million. You can save $5 million if you can find a sucker to trade for Wilson. Uzama, those guys save you about $5 million. Conklin, if he goes, that's another $5 million that you save. So, you've got a couple of guys there. Franklin Myers, 7-4, if you wanted to go down that route. I don't think they're going to be in a position where they have a lot of cap room to spend. But I think that they'll be okay with it. But right now they're in a big state of flux because of that Rodgers deal. And, obviously if Rodgers walks away, that's different too. But, we'll see. Brian, might you be going to any games this year? Probably not. I think Jacob would be too young to take to a game. I'd take him to a summer game, a preseason game or something like that. But sometimes it's still can get a little too rowdy for the younger kids, I think, there. And he gets, probably he gets too bored. He'll be more interested in going inside and trying to get some hot dogs and watching videos on my phone versus watching the game. So I don't think I'll go to any games this year, but maybe, maybe if something comes up. But I think it would be going with him, and I don't think there would be that kind of interest from him this year. Will the Seahawks face any salary cap issues in the near future? Off the top of my head, I don't think so. The contract is one of those that they can get out of with Geno Smith without too much trouble. Let me see where they rank. The middle of the league next year in cap space. Bottom third of the league in 2025. But I don't look at that and be like, yeah, they're in a position where they're going to have cap troubles, because either Geno Smith is going to be really good and he's going to be affordable for being really good, or Geno Smith is going to be pretty bad and they're going to have a younger guy taking snaps for him. And, he'll be cheap. So I think they'll be okay. 2 Browns questions. What would a Hopkins deal look like for 2 or 3 years? And should the Browns restructure Garrett or Cooper deals for additional rollover space? I don't know what a Hopkins deal. I look at Hopkins as a 110. Now, I never thought Beckham would get 15, though. But I would look at this as like a very similar deal to Michael Thomas, those types of players. 110 or 1 up to 10. Probably 110 up to 15, something like that. Obviously, nobody was looking to take him at 20. I think there's a lot of people that think he's done. I think there's a lot of people that think he's, a little bit over the hill. So I think you have to find a team that basically thinks that he's someone that can really help them now. I had mentioned the Browns months ago as a potential landing spot, only because the Browns are pretty aggressive. And, there's a history there with Deshaun Watson. The thing that I wouldn't like about Hopkins, if I was the Browns, he's a late career player, which is always iffy. He's a late career player that's played in more or less indoor environments, Houston, Arizona. I don't want to bring a player like that in. Now, doesn't mean you can't be that kind of player, right? But I don't know, playing in the AFC South, playing in the NFC West, I almost feel like a player like that towards the latter stages of their career, that's not the time I want to bring them out east, where so many of my games are going to be outside, going to be in the colder weather. I almost feel like that's not the time you bring that kind of player in to take that chance to be like, number one, can he still be the player that he was in the past? Number two, can he be that kind of player in a completely different type of playing environment? I would be probably negative on that. So I don't know what a 3-year deal would look like. I couldn't imagine Cleveland doing that kind of deal with him. This would be a 1-year deal with a low cap hit this year, and you would just push the money off to void years in the future. Should they restructure Garrett or the Cooper deals for additional cap room? That's up to them. I don't know if there's much in Garrett's deal that they could even gain. What's Myles Garrett at this year? Because I know his thing was structured with all those options, but maybe they're past that stuff by now. Oh yeah, no, they're fine with him. He's got a 17.25. I'm actually surprised they haven't redone his deal. Just looking at it. So my assumption is they would prefer to not touch either of these 2 deals. I'm just looking at the stuff here, unless they absolutely have to. And my guess is more likely what they're looking to do is to redo these deals. Would probably not Cooper, because I don't think Cooper's long-term probably with the team. It would be Garrett, and that's more, I think, next year. Doing some stuff for the future where you start getting into exit planning on that contract. As he gets further and further into it, where you're giving yourself more options with these, kind of trick ways to get around the June 1s and stuff like that. JR, if team's GM was offered a president-type role with another team, would they be owed trade compensation? I don't know about that one. The NFL has gotten, I know, stricter with some of the different names that they use for positions, so I'm not sure. What's your ideal restructure of a Rodgers contract? I think I think I would look to split this over 3 years. So let's assume that Rodgers is willing to play 3 years. And you owe him about 102 or 101 or whatever that is. I think I would probably try to aim for, 35 million cap hit this year, 35 million next year, and 35 million in void years. And you would have some protection in there in the event that he did retire, to where you could continue to, spread some of those cap numbers around, over a 3-year period versus a 2. I don't see the pay cut as a scenario. I could be wrong on that. I just don't see that. I think the Jets need to, before they can do that, like, they don't have the cap room to do that number that I just mentioned. So, I mean, they have to get some clarity on this Mosley thing. Him at 21.5 just doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. Corey Davis, it's like, with all these other guys taking pay cuts, how has Corey Davis not been given a pay cut yet? So my assumption is the Jets quietly, for all the talk that they have about it, still are not 100% certain on Corey Davis's spot on the team. Because if Corey Davis, if you look at what the Jets have done, right? Whitehead took a $2 million pay cut, give or take a little bit. Who was the other one that they restructured? They restructured another player, didn't they? Carl Lawson was the other one. Lawson took a pay cut of how much did he take? $6 million, I think. Yeah, he now gets 9. He was going to earn 15. There's no reason Corey Davis should still be earning his 10.5. Like, Corey Davis is, should be $6 or $7 million. So I'm gonna assume that the Jets are working on something there, because there's no logical reason. There's no logical reason for either of those two players to be at those numbers. So my assumption is, between those two players, they can create whatever kind of cap room they need to get up to around that 30-35 million for Rodgers. But I think that's what I would do, because you've got your roster that's here. You figure out your ways to make your cap room for it. But I'd want to have some steady hits, I think, on him, so where I can say, okay, we're going to survive through this year. We're going to push it right on the cap, and this is going to be our best chance to maybe do a little something in free agency next year versus that. Vin, when did the Jets force Mosley to take a pay cut? Same with Davis. Well, I think I just went over that one. But yeah, it's got to be this summer for those guys. With the severe overpay of Ed Oliver, does this finally light the fire under the Jets front office to lock up Quinnen? No, I don't think so. Any free agent moves you'd like to see the Jets make or stand pat? I don't know anything that's there, that's really even worthwhile. Mercedes, I don't think they've signed him yet, right? Mercedes Lewis. So, no, the answer would be no. I don't want to do that. Let me see who's even available. Just taking a quick peek here. They have safeties, so they don't need a safety. Leonard Floyd come in for the veterans minimum plus some benefit money. I mean, maybe. I don't think they need a guy like a Marcus Peters. Probably be too expensive anyway. I wouldn't make a commitment on Ngakoue for anything more than a couple $1,000,000 for a year. I'm sure there's guys you can add. If Alexander wants to come back for the minimum, you can bring him back. There's nothing wrong with that. I think the George Fant thing is pretty much done. It's more like, are there any veterans available that you think you could fit in on your defense or maybe your offensive line that really are coming in because they want to play with Rodgers, because they think there's a legitimate chance the Jets can win, win a Super Bowl or something. Let's see. What else do we got here? I'm just about done. Jefferson. Okay, Hurts has a contract that seems to be a big advantage salary cap-wise for the next 4 years. Is it possible for the Cowboys if Dak still gets his expected totals? So Hurts's contract is it's a very high risk strategy that they're taking there, with the way they've structured it. Hurts is not, he doesn't have the track record of some of these other guys. And the way this deal is structured is that the Eagles are basically, it's almost as if they're saying, all right, there's a 70% chance that this guy's our quarterback for the next 10 years. And we're structuring the contract in that manner. So, I mean, it's a very risky possibility. So if you look at a player like Dak, so first of all, where I mentioned before about all that dead money that he had, all that dead money, sunk costs that he already has in his contract, it's going to be hard just because of that, because he's got so much money remaining in his deal. Whereas when the Eagles signed Hurts, he had like nothing, right? $4 million in his contract versus an average of like $60 million for 2 years for Prescott that you have to account for. But the second thing is the age. Like, you don't want to do that kind of deal for Prescott. You can't do a deal for a guy who's turning 30 that essentially requires you to have him as your quarterback until he's 37 or 38 years old. You can't do that. So they're at different stages of their career. If Dallas was to do that, to where they were just like, well, you know what? We need to have as much cap room as possible. So let's do this deal where, we give him this monster signing bonus, minimum salary, monster option bonus, minimum salary, monster option bonus, minimum salary, monster option bonus, minimum salary. You get to a point where Prescott's 34 years old, probably breaking down, similar to like a Tony Romo, like Romo did. Romo was a little bit older than that, but, around that age, breaking down, and you've got millions and millions and millions and millions in dead money that's going to hit the minute you have to put him on the bench. It's like, what screwed up Dallas in some ways during the early Prescott years was Prescott wound up being a bailout. This is kind of what's happened with Chicago right now, though Prescott was better than Fields, I think at least. But Prescott bailed out the fact that Dallas signed a just not a right timing kind of deal with Romo. And they had a couple of other deals that they did that really didn't work out, and they pushed things too far. They were able to slide through that because their quarterback cost them like $700,000 a year, whatever Prescott's contract was as a mid-round pick. He got them through what was going to be a disaster if their quarterback was going to be broken down Romo and random backups for the days when Romo's back or ribs or whatever was going to flare up and not allow him to play. You would be putting yourself right back in that situation where, again, you'd be trying to count on, either being, I guess, like Fields, where you do get a guy in the mid part of the first round, which is a little bit harder to do, or even worse off to where you've got to get a guy in like the fourth round again, like with Dak, and getting through that. So, I don't think Dallas would have any reason to follow that model if they have any desire to kind of be competitive for a long period of time. All right, last question, Alex. Let's say the Bears have $25 million left in cap space at the start of the season. Do they push that money back, or do they just accept they aren't reaching the limit? So Chicago is going to be fine with all that spending stuff. That's not really based on cap; it's based on cash. I'll try to do after all the rookies finalize getting signed this year. I mean, I could do it before that. It's just easier for me this way. I'll do a rundown to see where all those teams are. Chicago, the money that you spend in the off season. So in other words, like contract extensions, like let's say Chicago needed $10 million to reach a threshold. They have time to do that. You money that you spend in February counts to the prior year. So, it's not I wouldn't get worried about the cash spending for any of these teams. if that's a concern. What the Bears are doing, and I think it's a very smart move. Obviously, they spent a lot this offseason. They're keeping a lot in reserve. They still have the most amount of cap room remaining. They'll roll over most of that to next year. It gives you a chance to add to your team in stages. You add it this year, you add next year, versus a couple of these teams that just go crazy and you just take 1 year and you go, okay, this was our year, and let's see how this works out. So they were smart to not go down that path. So I think they've done things in a pretty effective manner there. Now, of course, it's got to work out on the field, but we'll see how that plays out for him this year. So, all right, that'll do it for me. So this was a quick one relative to the usual timings for this stuff. So not sure if next week we'll be back. Again, it's a pretty busy weekend. If I get an opportunity, I'll try to hop on, do something. If anyone has any topic ideas, just shoot them over. But at some point in the next 2 weeks, we'll sneak another podcast in, even if it's a hour-long one of these days. So everybody have a great week, and I'll talk to you all again soon.